record. All right, we're recording.
Okay.
And I don't know if people who are in the waiting room can see this actually, because we have the waiting room.
They cannot. Waiting room is just a blank screen.
Okay,
I mean, from all the waiting rooms I've been in, that's what happens. So
okay. Okay, so maybe we'll give everybody another 5 minutes. Should we do that? And then we can leave this up and I'll start. You can let Heather in, David. Okay,
I just did.
okay. Oh,
Connected finally. This thing is so slow, it's pathetic.
You are muted.
Oh, shit.
Guys, if Dan Wolf shows up, please let him in.
There's Jill. All right, I'm gonna stop sharing and go ahead and start. Right. Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to the first Southern California Planning Congress event of 2022. It is called We Are All Neighbors, First Person Stories of Living on the Street. So thank you very much for joining us. I'm your host, Juliana Delgado. I'm the president of the Southern California Planning Congress. The Congress is a nonprofit organization. It was established about a century ago. It's run solely by volunteers dedicated to encouraging debate and cooperation across jurisdictions on planning-related issues. So before we begin today, I want to thank all of you who've given your time to work on this event, our board of directors, and especially our senior vice president, Brian Marchetti, who serves as our web designer and our webmaster. So before we get started, I'd like to go over a few ground rules, if I may. Since this is an open format and not a webinar, you might want to use the speaker view on the top right corner of your screen to focus on our speakers. So you can try that out. It toggles. The chat's available for comments and questions, but please be mindful about sending questions or comments to everyone, especially when the panelists are speaking, because it can be kind of disruptive. Also, please hold your questions until the Q&A portion of our program, and then raise your hand so you can be recognized and unmuted. Finally, the meeting format was set up to be inclusive, but if there are any disruptions, we may shut down the meeting, and if that does happen, I apologize, and we will reschedule it. So cross our fingers, everything will be good and everyone will behave. So today's event focuses on stories of transformation and resilience from those among us who've survived living on the street. It has been said that 7 out of 10 Americans are just one paycheck away from being homeless. Why is this occurring, and how do we reverse the trend? It would take a longer discussion than we have time for this morning to explore all the root causes, but we can think of some of them. Is it a result of a capitalist and consumerist economy, a political system that favors wealth, stagnant wages that lead to poverty, a growing deficit in affordable housing, inequities in education, little access to healthcare and supportive services and programs, misconceptions about homeless people and a lack of compassion, or all of the above and more? As we begin a hopefully brighter new year, today's goals are to strengthen our commitment as planners and as citizens to making more inclusive decisions about the future, understanding more clearly the universal need for shelter and that safe and decent housing is a human right. Let's broaden the definition of neighbor so that no one among us gets left behind or left out, is invisible or forgotten. So I want to start the program by thanking our moderator, Brian Biery. Brian is an adjunct professor at Pacific Oaks College, where he teaches courses on advocacy, social justice, and human development. He is also a partner of the DBK group that provides technical assistance to government agencies on matters of law enforcement, criminal justice, public service, and police and community relations. He is a modest fellow, and he is also a very talented photographer. So I will now turn the program over to my dear friend, Brian Biery. And you're on, Brian.
Thank you, Juliana. Welcome. Good morning to everyone. Thank you for spending a bit of your Saturday with us. This is a very important topic, and so by your attendance, you're demonstrating how valuable it is to you as well. What I wanted to start off with is to say thank you to the Southern California Planning Congress for hosting this event and for providing this platform for us to think more deeply about the causes and solutions for homelessness, And I wanted to thank Juliana Delgado in particular and the rest of the board for being open to this conversation. I also want to thank our panelists, who I will be introducing to you briefly in a few minutes. Shawn Morrissey, Lindsay Dennis, and Dorothy Edwards. Thank you, thank you, thank you for all of your goodwill and good intentions, and for your support during this project. So what I'd like to do now is I'm going to show a very brief PowerPoint presentation that defines how we got to where we are. Also, what wasn't mentioned in my introduction is that I'm an artist and a photographer, and I use photography to raise awareness about social justice issues in documentary photography. And so I was thinking, after hearing from family members and friends who made comments about people who are unhoused, which I thought were inappropriate and unfair, I thought, let's try to change the narrative. How might we reshape people's thoughts, or bring another perspective to people's thoughts and imaginations about who is unhoused, how they became unhoused, and what are some strategies to move them from unhoused conditions to housing. What I decided to do was to show photographs of transformation. And that's what I'm going to share with you right now. The idea was, as opposed to going to Skid Row and photographing the tents there, or by the side of the 110 freeway, and photographing people's challenges, I wanted to photograph people who have lived transformed lives, who are positively contributing to our community, and to let folks know, other people know, that this is absolutely totally possible. And in our conversation today, you're going to see how it's possible, and what some of the steps that we can all take, both individually and collectively, to address this very, very severe issue in our community. So what does it look like for a person to go from extremely challenged conditions to now stability, to being unhoused, to housed, to possibly not having employment, to having employment, to having hope, to having opportunity? And it looks like this. And this is Lindsay, and you will meet her in a few minutes. So what the idea is to show the outcome that we want. The outcome that we want is success for individuals, so that they have opportunities to reach their full potential. So this is a brief overview of the project. The individuals in so I decided to reach out to Union Station Homeless Services. They were very receptive. What I did is I said, I would like to photograph people who have gone through this process of transformation, who would be interested. Lindsay and Cynthia Kirby, Shawn and Dorothy were all very eager to do it. So we went to places that had significance of them. We created photographs at those places. What ended up happening was I built an exhibit. The exhibit has been shown. It was up at Rosebud Coffee for about 2 months. It was also at Pasadena Foursquare Church for a few weeks. And the exhibit was designed to be interactive. So there were photographs of each of the individuals, which were on the flyer that you received. And then ultimately, there were statements from the participants. I interviewed them. I wanted to learn more about their experience and their challenges and their joys, and what is working for them now. So during the exhibit, then people could place Post-it notes on the wall sending messages to the individuals in the exhibit. So the last point I want to make is that we all have a role in this. As I mentioned before, whether it's a collective role, whether it's thinking about it from a community perspective, but it's also thinking about it from an individual. What can I do individually? And there are many steps we can all take. I want to show you a few of the images that were made. So this is Lindsay, this is Arlington Garden. This is a place, she will talk about it later, a place where she went to refresh and recharge. This is Shawn. This is Shawn has been an outreach, street outreach worker on many occasions for quite a few years. And this is a place where he would go. And actually he is assisted Dorothy at this place, and they can talk about it a little bit more. This is Cynthia, who unfortunately is not able to be with us today, who is now administrative assistant at First Baptist Church. And this is in her place of work. And this is Dorothy Edwards, who will be talking to us in a few minutes at Teague Terrace, which is a permanent supportive housing project in Eagle Rock, where she's enrichment services coordinator. Just some last thoughts. What are your role? What is your role in this? Again, not only as members of the community, but as compassionate people, potentially as people of faith. How are we as individuals treating people who are unhoused? How are we stepping up for affordable and permanent supportive housing? How are we acting as advocates? And then I want you to be thinking about some of the other ways in which you may be helping right now. And here's a list of resources. The one I want to point out at the end is that Shawn was published recently in Colorado Boulevard, and he has a very powerful op-ed piece there. But these are some of the organizations that are working. So I want to stop the share right now. And after providing you with that overview, what we'd like to do is get to meet Shawn, Dorothy, and Lindsay. And so what we'd like to do is have each of them, rather than having me attempt to express or explain their experiences, we want to give them a few minutes each to be able to talk about their experiences. So let's start with Shawn, and then we'll go to Lindsay and then Dorothy. So Shawn, thank you for being with us today. And what would you like people to know about your personal experience?
Thanks for having us, Brian. My name is Shawn Morrissey. I just want to say hi to some of my old friends here, and then hopefully some of my new friends. And it's an odd dynamic to show up regularly to meetings to share some of the most traumatic and shame-filled times of my life in front of strangers. And oddly enough, I do that over and over again. And I can't say it really gets any easier, but I've learned how to talk about some of those things. And I just want to uplift the other two panelists, Dorothy and Lindsay, for being able to show up and talk about those sometimes very shameful, very hard times in front of people. And so I thank you for your kindness in listening to us, and for being here, and for caring enough to show up and talk to us. I get some flack for that hoodie that I was wearing in the picture. It says "We love drug users." Half the people who approach me want to know what the hell I mean by putting a statement like that out there, and the other half want to know how they can volunteer for that organization. And I'll say this about that shirt. I learned along the way that people who have substance use issues have a really hard time talking about it. It has to do with that shame and a lot of stigma attached to it. And so my intention is to let people know that I'm a safe person to talk to about that, and that these discussions have to happen out in the open, and that they're hard discussions to have and they're hard issues to deal with. But we need to begin talking about them before we can actually work on them. And people hide those things in secret because they don't want anyone to know that that's a problem they deal with. And they also know that if they talk about it or admit to it, they'll oftentimes be punished as a result of it. And so my intention in putting that messaging out there is to allow people to know that I'm safe to talk to about this. Let's talk about it and let's get you some help. Briefly, I'm a man who grew up in a very dysfunctional household with a lot of substance use around me, a lot of trauma, a lot of violence, and many, many years of sexual abuse at the hands of my birth father. And it wasn't long before I turned to substances to begin soothing too. So part of my story is one of substance use. And I can say this, that back then when I started doing that, I almost credit substances and that substance use for saving my life, because I was in such an insane, untenable environment and situation that had it not been for that, I might have turned to suicide or something like that. And of course, as we all know, substances which may soothe in the beginning, turn around and what they did for you to begin with, they start doing to you after a while. And, I used drugs. I was a heroin addict. I used IV drugs for almost 27 years. I wound up homeless and kind of washed up in Pasadena just before my 40th birthday in 2002, and ended up at the shelter where I was met for the very first time with the type of unconditional positive regard, non-judgment, and nurture and love that hopefully I was trying to describe in why I wear that shirt. And I had never met a group of people before who were there to not judge me, but simply to help lift me up and move me forward. And they took mercy upon me and let me stay at the shelter, sent me to detox. I went to drug and alcohol treatment, which I had been trying to get into for the past year before winding up at Union Station. The barriers to get into treatment in 2002 were myriad. In 2022, 20 years later, they're not much better, and we can talk a little bit about that during this meeting. But it was that community, and it was that love, and it was being surrounded by people who had some capacity and facility that I didn't have, and some resources that I definitely didn't have access to, that started me on my journey to wellness. And then, humbly, I was able to come and work for that agency a couple years later. And, I've been at Union Station now two times, from 2004 to 2008. In 2008, I left to work at a place called Housing Works, where I mentored under a woman named Molly Lowry, who was a pioneer in homeless services in LA County. And after 7 years, came back to Union Station to start some of their permanent supportive housing programs, which I know we'll talk about as well. There's a whole lot more to that story, but we just have a few minutes, and I think I've probably taken more than my share. I will also say that Cynthia Kirby, who wanted to attend, gives her apologies. Something came up and she's not able to attend, but hopefully at some point you'll all get to hear her story, because it, again, like Dorothy's and Lindsay's and mine, it's just an incredible story of transformation, salvation, health, and wellness. And I've watched that story in the 18 years that I've done this work. I've watched that story play out over and over again. And it only happens when housing becomes part of the solution to homelessness. So thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Shawn. And we will go into a little bit more depth. So Lindsay, are you ready to go next? Great. As Lindsay's getting ready, I want everyone to be thinking about, we will have a Q&A at the end. So please take a little bit of notes if you're comfortable with that. And then also write down a question or two or three that you would like to discuss with the group. And we'll do that after we do a panel discussion. So Lindsay, go ahead.
All right, thank you so much, Brian. Hi, everybody. I'm just gonna go right into my story. So, Christmas was always my favorite holiday. My family wasn't perfect by any means, but that day always felt perfect to me. In 2016, that all changed. That Christmas, my parents had moved to the Northwest, and I found myself completely alone. I remember feeling so empty that day. It felt like hitting rock bottom all over again. I felt the same hopelessness, desperation, and emptiness as I had felt when I was unhoused 7 years before at 27. I had recently graduated with a bachelor's degree in psychology and had undiagnosed bipolar disorder. I had no coping skills for an undiagnosed condition other than unhealthy skills, so I medicated my pain with huge amounts of alcohol. I crashed my car going in reverse down my street to sneak away from my parents to buy more alcohol. And my poor parents, who I was living with at the time, asked me to leave. I remember being suicidal because I never felt so lost or so much fear. That night, I tried to take my life, but survived with a broken heart. I would rather have been dead than unhoused. With nothing to do, nowhere to go, and no sense of safety, I felt afraid constantly, and homelessness was more than I could handle. I was in and out of hospitals and psych wards due to lots of suicide attempts, motels, sober living places, rehabs, you name it. After being hospitalized or institutionalized a dozen times, I was finally diagnosed with bipolar disorder. In total, I experienced 7 years of pain and fear with bouts of being unhoused. Eventually, I found the right medication and received Section 8 housing. Actually, I was fast-tracked to receive Section 8 through my mental health care provider. I don't know what would have happened to me otherwise. I had permanent housing with I have had permanent housing with Section 8 for the past 12 years. I have lived in my current apartment for over 6 years and have an excellent relationship with my landlord. He's my friend. I always pay rent on time and take good care of my home. My point is that I'm just like you, but for a mental illness. A few bad things happen to a person who doesn't make much money, and becoming unhoused can become a reality, bipolar disorder or not. I challenge everyone to remember that the next time you interact with or ignore someone who doesn't have a home. I challenge everyone to consider what it would be like to live in that person's shoes. Then I encourage empathy and action. My action today looks like being the policy chair on a panel that advises Union Station homeless services. It looks like participating in a program to help me learn how to best advocate to end homelessness. It looks like taking a day to talk to legislators to advocate for bills that aim to end homelessness. It looks like my job, being a state policy advisor to a nonprofit that's resources help communities create and model cost-effective supportive housing to address many challenges, including homelessness, unnecessary institutionalizations, mental health needs, substance use recovery, crime, family separations, and poverty. I'm proud of where I am today. I feel good about what I'm doing and that my life has meaning. If people who don't have homes are given a chance to improve their lives, of course they will. And we have the right to be housed. Everyone does. Please take our stories with you into your daily life. Thank you for letting me share my story.
Lindsay, thank you very much for your honesty and your powerful story. As we move into Dorothy's introduction, I'd like to ask all of the people in the audience to consider one of the points that Lindsay made is how do you react if you see someone when you're walking into the grocery store? What thoughts go through your mind when you see someone asking for money at the end of the freeway off-ramp? How do you respond? And just think about that for a minute, contemplate it, and we'll discuss it later on in the program. Dorothy, welcome. Good morning. Please, what's on your heart this morning?
Hi, good morning, everyone. Thank you for having me. I'd like to first off say welcome to anybody who's from the Pasadena Continuum of Care, which was my first advocating venture. And it got me set on a path of compassion, love, and healing. And I'm very grateful for you. I'm very happy to be here today with some of my best friends in the whole world. I would never imagine I would ever have friends like that, and it means a lot to me. I just want to share that when I was homeless like 10 years ago, when all the winds came, speaking of the winds last night and everything, 10 years ago when I was homeless and I was living in a tent on the side of the 210 freeway, and it was early in the morning, and Shawn Morrissey came over to my tent and he woke me up, and I rolled out of bed and he goes, I just wanted to check on you, man. Those winds were horrible. And he goes, I looked down the street. He told me to look down the street. All the trees were blown down on Walnut Street. And then I looked over at my tent, and there was a branch that was completely into my tent over my bed area. But there was a branch that was holding it from coming down and smashing me. And I'm just grateful to have a home today where it's warm and it's safe. And my dog was scared, but at least we were indoors this time. Last time when I was homeless, I did have a dog as well. His name was Gunner, but I lost him a few years ago to cancer. So Shawn and I share a similar path, and it's kind of ironic because Shawn was my case manager at Housing Works when they found me living on the streets. The city of Pasadena was doing, it was called 100,000 Homes Across America. And I was, the city of Pasadena had 20 vouchers for its most vulnerable, most likely to die on the streets within a year, if not housed. 20 vouchers for those chronically homeless folks, and I was one of them. Because of my risky behavior, my age, being a woman, just everything I did on the streets. I was a drug addict for 40 years, from 15 years old to 55 years old when I got housed. When I got housed, I brought my addiction into my housing. It's a housing first model. But after 10 months, and my landlord was not going to have it, I figured, God, I don't want to go back on the streets. So what happened was, Shawn goes, why don't you stop using, and I'll do anything I can to support you in it. And, it was him sharing his personal stories with me, because I too was an IV drug abuser for 24 years. I was a full-blown heroin addict at 19 years old. And I was in and out of never having a place to live on my own. The only time I ever lived with anywhere is when I lived with somebody that I really didn't love, but I was having sex just to have a roof over my head with. It was horrible. And when I got a little older, I just got to the point where I didn't want to have to do that anymore. So I just wound up on the streets. And so when you're sitting at a stop sign and you see somebody pushing a shopping cart across a crosswalk, they're pushing it, you can see that they're dirty, they're tired, they're hungry. I had my dog with me, I was that person. I just want to say that we all look the same hovering over a shopping cart with our belongings in it. It doesn't matter who you are. If you are in that position, we all look the same. So that's something to think about when you see somebody like that. Just imagine yourself with what little you have left in a shopping cart, trying to find, say, your chapstick, or, it's just really sad, but it's a brisk truth that we all need to face. We need to be supportive and humanize our folks that are unhoused out there, because they are human and they have hearts and they have feelings and they have, a lot of love, and they have so much to offer to the community. This advocacy thing for me was, they say you trade one addiction for another. So when I got clean, and March 1st coming up is going to be 9 years clean that I have. Woohoo! And I never imagined that I would have a life ever. Today, I work in a 54-unit supportive housing building in Eagle Rock, and I do enrichment services. Because of COVID, I do most of my groups via Zoom. And, I got the participants, they're very grateful to me for everything I've done so far. I've worked there for 6 years at that building, and they all know me, and I'm just part of the building. I finally belong somewhere. I support everybody. I've watched people go back to school, get their degrees, become deacons, become care coordinators for children, and to me, and get clean and sober. And to me, that's what my job is all about. And I don't call it my job, I just call it my passion, because it makes me so happy to see when people keep coming up and keep going up. And there are a few that it takes a little longer. And so we just got to be patient. And so I work for Housing Works like Shawn did before. And he was not only my case manager, he became my coworker. So that to me was like such a huge step in my recovery, in my workforce, in everything I had going on and everything I wanted to happen in my life. I sit now, actually, I've been sitting on the National Board of Directors at Corporation for Supportive Housing, CSH, and their headquarters are in New York, but we have offices all across the country. And today I sit on the board, and we allocate funding for pre-development loans to build housing for individuals like me and like the people who live where I work, which was funded by CSH as well. I'm grateful. I have a dog that was really scared last night, and so I sort of didn't get a lot of sleep last night, but I'm just grateful to see all of you here today. And we can fix this. We can make things better if we all coordinate together, collaborate together, and treat it, because it's a crisis, and we need to treat it as one. It's not just something that's, if Brian would have taken pictures of people living on the streets, they're still stuck in the crisis. But what we want to show you is what getting people out of that crisis can do for them. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Dorothy. And thanks, Dorothy and Lindsay and Shawn, for your terrific introductions. So another question I would pose for the audience just to contemplate is, as you can see, in all of us, there's a great amount of potential, human potential for creativity, for compassion, and for contributions to society. That potential is lost every time someone is unhoused. So our society loses as a result of it. We want to focus on recapturing that human potential through transformation. And we want to leave you with the thought that transformation happens all the time. And these are three extraordinary examples. So what is our role in helping that transformation to occur again and again and again? So what we're going to talk about are three sort of topic areas. So myth busting. All three of our panelists have talked a little bit about the myths that go on, whether it's around mental health or drug use. So we'll be diving into busting some myths in a minute. The next area is broken systems. So how, and Juliana really did an excellent job of framing the issue. So what are the contributing factors of everything from affordable housing, defunding housing programs, the mental health system? How do those contribute to making people more vulnerable? And then the last area is solutions. And Dorothy was talking about some of the ways in which she takes action. Actually, all three of our panelists mentioned that. But again, thinking about it from a collective angle as well as an individual angle. So to start that off, one of the topics that came up was this whole notion that any one of us could be homeless. Any one of us could end up in these conditions. And so I wanted to go into that a little bit more profoundly. And Lindsay, I think you were one of the ones that said, I could be you, you could be me. So how does that happen? What did you mean by that?
Well, I could be you, you could be me, but for a mental illness, but for if you're living paycheck to paycheck, a job loss. I mean, I had a home. I had a home. I had a warm place to sleep at night, and I had I mean, my mind wasn't where I wanted it to be, but I had a warm place and I had a job and I had all these things. I had a bachelor's degree. I mean, I had all of these things that made it look on the outside like I should be able to maintain housing, and yet I wasn't for a variety of factors, you know? And so that means that anybody could lose a spouse and suddenly have their income cut and lose a home and then have no place to go. You know, anybody could go through that. You could lose your job and have the same thing happen. You never know, and everything can change in an instant.
Yeah, and it's you know, another area is healthcare or having an illness that often sends people into extremely dire straits. Dorothy or Shawn, was anything you want to add to that sort of experience, Dorothy?
Yes, I just want to share that, you know, the crime going on is always a crime of need. If we could meet people's needs, it would definitely take crime down. But the thing what I see is we are having such a hard time coming up as like single parents, as just individual adults, because every time that we get a cost of living raise, you go to the store and the stuff doubles and triples. It's like it keeps us down. We need to get a system that supports you know, livable wages, that supports good health care. And that's, you know, that's my opinion of that. But real quick, I'd like to share a story about how I could be you, you could be me, and I'm just like you. When I was flying a sign at Target, there was a family that came by, a mother with her children, and she would roll the window down and the kids would hand me like $1. And one day they came and they rolled the window down and they handed me a paper plate with all these cute Christmas cookies on it. And they had D's on them for my name. And they're like, we made these for you, Dorothy. And I was like very grateful. But then when they pulled away, I was like, they're going home. I want a home. I'm just like they are. I want a home. And, you know, and I didn't let the kids see me cry, but as soon as they pulled away, man, they were, they were coming. And so I recognize people who are still out there just like that. They want just what we have, what I always yearned for out there. They just want to have a home. They just want to have the safety of a home, the comfort of a home. Thank you.
That's a wonderful story, Dorothy. Thank you for sharing that. Heartbreaking as well. One for me, one of the scenarios that occurred, you know, in the last year was I had people telling me, you know, friends and family that, there's, you know, there's a proposal for tiny homes over in West Pasadena, you know, do you think that that should really happen? You know, what's gonna happen to the property values? What's gonna happen to, you know, that neighborhood if they install those tiny homes? A couple of years ago near my mother's home, there was the Ramada Inn was slated to be converted into permanent supportive housing, and there was couple of community meetings. There were flyers. One ended up on my mother's doorstep and a lot of pushback. And so actually, I wanted to go to Shawn on this question is how, it feels like much of the rest of society tries to distance ourselves from people who are unhoused. And yet we're interconnected on many levels, and we're all part of the same community and part of the same family. How do the lives of people who are unhoused intertwine with the lives of people who are housed? How do we get people to see that there's more of an interconnection?
Yeah, thanks, Brian. I guess what comes to mind is, and as Lindsay and Dorothy were talking, this idea that, like, not only I could be you and you could be me, but I am you and you are me. Like you said, Brian, we're part of the same human family. And I think that, homelessness is such an isolating experience, and exactly what Dorothy described, like the physical presentation of someone who's homeless is potentially scary. I mean, I didn't look like this, when I showed up. I had a, gash in my forehead. I had 2 black eyes. I had no underwear. I hadn't slept. My hair was crazy. You would have walked to the other side of the street just by virtue of my appearance. But had you spent any time, sitting and talking to me, you would have got some version of what you're getting today. Not as clear a version, certainly, but just someone who was loving, kind, wanting more for themselves, had hopes, longings, and dreams that are exactly like the ones that everybody in this room has. And I think that I think we just have a history of othering people that look different or scary. And there's some high visibility folks who are homeless who are really struggling and have some challenges and some complexities associated and behaviors associated with what they're going through. And, those are the highly visible folks, but they make up a very small percentage of the 70,000 people that are homeless in Los Angeles County. But because they're so visible, we tend to think of homeless folks as being those people in general. And, to Lindsay's point, homelessness is really a macroeconomic issue. That's what we're really talking about here. We can cite all sorts of behaviors or conditions or illnesses or disorders as lending themselves to homelessness. But at the end of the day, the fact of the matter is there are certain groups of our society that will never fall into homelessness because they have resources, regardless of whatever conditions and disorders they may personally be experiencing. They have multiple resources and safety nets in place that they will never be allowed to fall into homelessness. They can afford the type of treatment that precludes someone from falling into homelessness. Whereas, a lot of us, the rest of us who have none of those resources, have a really hard time navigating a system that was never set up to actually treat these conditions effectively. And I hope we get a chance to talk a little bit more about that too, because we often talk about this idea that, the help is out there if people really want it. They could avail themselves of it. And the fact of the matter is that is not true. It's never been true. The systems are full of barriers. It can take, days, weeks, months to get into a treatment facility. It can take 3 months to get in front of a psychiatrist to get a medication. These systems are so complex and barrier-ridden and filled with impediments that someone trying to navigate that system alone can rarely ever do it. And with a partner or a caseworker at your side, it's still hard to do. I think I got way off topic of what your question was, but yeah, we're all the same and we're all looking for the same solutions and wants, but some of us just present a little bit differently, and that's scary to society as a whole. And I get that. I understand that, but I think a lot of what we're talking about here is to try to just humanize this and have people see that no matter what the condition, these are just people like us. We're all the same.
Yeah, and you did stray a little bit there, Shawn, but
As I
that's
do.
okay because we'll pull it back all together. But yeah, I want all of you to think about, so what let's think a little bit more deeply about humanizing. What does that mean, first of all, and then how could it be done? How can we help people who haven't had that experience to feel more empathy? I think that was a word that both Lindsay and Dorothy raised up. Even if they do encounter, if we do encounter someone who looks a little bit scary, as Shawn mentioned, what suggestions do any of the three of you have for creating that human connection? What could we be doing? Lindsay?
I think the first thing, my first thought is just have a conversation with somebody. I mean, not even a conversation, just small talk. Just engage with somebody. Don't ignore them. It's something that I found like day changing when people would see, and I looked kind of scary too. And sometimes people would come up to me and talk to me and ask me if I was okay. Every once in a while that happened, and it changed my mood for the day. It changed how I felt inside. And I think everybody deserves that.
Yeah, I think that takes a little bit of courage on the part of the person who's not understanding the conditions of homelessness. But Dorothy, you had, yeah, I want to hear from you, Dorothy, because you had shared a story once about how that might take place. Go ahead, Dorothy.
Me being there before and being totally invisible, totally disregarded, I cannot, with the good mind, walk past it, with the good heart, walk past anybody out there without recognizing them. I think it's important that everybody remembers when they're looking at an individual that's going through homelessness issues, that we have to know in our hearts that that person is just not what we see right now. That person is somebody's son, somebody's daughter, somebody's brother, somebody's uncle, aunt. You know, that person belongs somewhere, and there's right now they're just not there. And I think it's important that we recognize that and bring it back to loving our neighbors, being kind to one another, loving one another, supporting one another. You know, that's how I see it.
Yeah, all terrific suggestions. So I see a lot of the audience members are jotting down notes. So I'm hoping they'll take these ideas with them and share them. And that's actually another request I'd have for the audience on two levels. One is, what are you going to do with the information that you learned today? And then how might you also share the stories of Shawn, Lindsay, and Dorothy? And we can talk about how that might manifest itself. So let's circle back to that one of the other areas that Shawn opened up for us, and that's the broken systems. So could any of you describe what it was when you were, what were some of the barriers when you were trying to recraft your life, when you were attempting to change direction? What were some of the barriers that you encountered, and then what are some of the ones that you see? And maybe starting with Dorothy, since you're working at Teague Terrace, what challenges do people face as they're trying to get back on their feet?
The biggest challenge, I think, is self-worth, self-acceptance. They have been beat up so long out on the streets, and it's really difficult to, it takes a lot of support, and it takes a lot of recognition and pulling people up and telling them, hey, you're doing it, and supporting them through it, because they were so beat up on the streets, even by themselves or by society, that, to be recognized as, the little steps are the huge steps, and so where I work, I'm just, grateful. Like this one gentleman, he is a gentleman from the regional center, which is he has a developmental problem, issue, whatever, not a problem, but he's developmentally delayed, and he was getting taken advantage of by the people that are still on the streets over on the side of the building where I work at, and they're introducing him to methamphetamine, and he starts getting strung out on it. And I pulled him back in, and a year later, I gave him a 1-year cake for clean and sober. And to reward me, he brought me a ribbon that he won at the Special Olympics after that. And he brought it to me and goes, "Thank you for helping me get off the dope." And that, stuff like that. It's just so heartwarming and so fulfilling just to experience that with this guy, you know. And I'm like that with everybody. And I know COVID's crazy and we're not supposed to be near anybody. But I'm telling you, when somebody's pulling out of the driveway and they see me standing in front of the building, they'll put their car in park and come and give me a hug with their mask on, of course. You know, that, you know, they tell me, "Well, we know you love everyone. We know you care about all of us." And because I was Thursday, I held a vaccination clinic there. And so we did boosters, we did first and second doses, and we also did free flu shots with Department of Health Services, and it was very successful. And so that, you know, just stuff like that. We have consultation nurses there. It's phenomenal, just all the work that we could put to get people, because a lot of people don't want to be out on the street. They've been homeless so long, they don't want to leave their house. Like when I got housed, I didn't want to leave my house. I'm like, go out there, why?
Yeah, and Dorothy, let's talk about that for just a second. You said earlier that you were one of 20 vouchers. So, and Shawn, I want you to be thinking about this as well. If there were only 20 vouchers at that time, but we have several hundred people on the street in Pasadena at any moment, what is it about the system? What's broken, or what's a problem there? Why are there not more vouchers? Dorothy, do you have some ideas?
Yeah, well, I just real quick, I'll share that when I was housed 10 years ago, it was completely opposite. There were very few vouchers and a lot of housing. Now it's a lot of vouchers and no housing. So we have to support our community by building housing for folks. Adequate, beautiful, safe housing, just like anybody else, because we're human. We all deserve the same thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, let's talk about that. There have been attempts to build housing, as I mentioned, the Ramada in conversion. And then I was at, and I think Shawn, you were there too, the Salvation Army here in Pasadena. Some of you on the call are not from Pasadena, but I think it's illustrative of any community. So there were charrettes that were held. The Salvation Army had proposed to build something like 60, 65 units of permanent supportive housing. And there were people there that said, "No, I don't want this in my neighborhood. And I'm worried, or I think that those people will drink in front, they'll get high in front of the building, they'll come and urinate on my lawn." Shawn, what are, you were talking about broken systems. How does all this factor into, preventing more housing from being built?
Well, I think that, modern day homelessness is a modern phenomenon. It's not something that we've experienced historically, not in the numbers that we see today. And so when we think of it in terms of a modern day phenomenon, it's, approximately we've been experiencing this problem in this way for about 40 years. And it's not as if 40 years ago, people started making worse decisions than ever before, in the history of bad decisions. It was this combination of broken or failed systems, everything that goes back to kind of racist systems from redlining to the Vietnam War to the Mental Health Systems Act of 1980, the Budget Reconciliation Act of 1981, the federal government's disinvestment in affordable housing, the AIDS crisis, the war on drugs. You take all of those things together, and we can point to how homelessness started and what has continued to perpetuate it based upon those things. And so the hardest part about navigating being homeless is navigating any one of those systems or the fallout from those systems. And along the way, we came to this conclusion that housing was not something that you deserved by virtue of the fact that you didn't have it. Housing was something that you needed to earn or show that you deserved. And we created within our homeless system sector, with the approval of everyone around us, this idea that you had to jump through a bunch of hoops and comply with a bunch of conditions before you could then kind of earn your housing. And that worked really well for those kind of high functioning folks who could jump through all of the hoops. And it didn't work well at all for folks who had more complexities or challenges. And those folks languished on the street, and those numbers grew. And we've wound up with where we're at today. So I think that the holdover is still this idea that, like, there's certain people who don't deserve to be in housing. People really need to kind of pull themselves up by their bootstraps and get on with it in order to get into housing. And I think that what I'm describing in terms of these broken systems and structures is that, you know, not only do some people not have bootstraps, some folks don't even have boots, you know, and so there's a long way to go between someone who's on the street to get into housing and the things that have to happen. And we wait around, I think, hoping that people will self-resolve these issues. And the fact of the matter is, for many people, you just don't get well on the street. That's never going to happen. It's only four walls and a roof over your head that provides that kind of starting foundation where you can begin to get well. But I think as a society, we don't like that idea. In general, we think of that as being a handout to people who don't deserve it. And consequently, we also have this, in my perception, misbelief that anyone who's living on the street and behaving in those ways that we cite that homeless folks behave, that they will then go into housing and behave in exactly the same way. And we know that to be absolutely not true. As Dorothy described, people go into housing, they become invested in ownership and being inside for the very first time. And the minute that housing becomes at risk because of behaviors, we go in and we help people work on those things. And that's why we have a 97% success rate with permanent housing in Pasadena at Union Station, because we practice a very specific model. And when we're talking about homelessness being a problem, right, or homeless people, I should say, being a problem, we're always talking about street homelessness and the visibility of that and the things that happen on the street. I have really never engaged in a conversation where we're talking about the problem that a permanent housing solution presented to the neighborhood, because the fact of the matter is people do start to resolve these issues when they are allowed the dignity and the health of being inside. And that's just the way it works, you know. That's the way we all work, you know, in community, with safety around us, being offered resources, and in community and relationship with others, we always get better. It's the thing that allows us to move through the world our entire lives in a healthy way, is the environment that we're in. If you're in a homeless environment that is completely isolating and punitive and stigmatized, you know, you behave and respond accordingly. Yeah,
and it's so frustrating to contemplate, you know, what you pointed out, that homelessness, at least from a historical perspective, is rather new. And it's unique to the United States. There are other societies, I'm sure, that experience it to a certain level, but it seems like other countries do a better job at dealing with this challenge. Lindsay, I saw your hand up. What were you thinking about the housing situation?
Just that incarceration and this not carousel, what's the word I'm looking for, that
Well, it's a cycle. It's
Cycle,
a,
it's just, it's a cycle. You go into jail and then first you get arrested based on whatever systemic issue and maybe you've done something wrong, but you end up getting arrested, you go to jail. Then when you get out of jail, they don't give you anything, maybe like 20 bucks on a good day and like maybe enough money for a way to get on the bus and go where and do what. There's no, it's a revolving door. Thank you, Dan. I love you, Dan. And that's exactly what it is. People, and then people don't know what to do. And then they commit crime because they have to feed themselves and they have to take care of their needs. And then they go back to jail. And then they get out of jail and the same thing happens. And it's so frustrating because we could change this. We could change this effect. We could actually intervene and try and rehabilitate people who end up incarcerated. Try and help them. Try and help them with education. Try and help them with all kinds of things. And I guess my point here is that there are bills out there that are combining working on this issue of the revolving door of incarceration and homelessness and how to work on both at the same time because they're so interconnected.
yeah, and yeah, Dorothy, hang on just a second. I think the philosophy of housing first, Lindsay, in that situation of formerly incarcerated works just as well. It's very important for someone who's coming out of incarcerated conditions to have a place to stay, have a place to go. Dorothy, what were you thinking?
So I was thinking about incarceration. I was thinking about when I was homeless, I lived for 3 of the 7, the last time I was homeless due to domestic violence, thank you, was I had a van for 3 of those years and the police impounded it. And with it, they took my ID, my everything. I had nothing. I had my dog, a roller bag, 1 blanket, and some dog food. So the next day or 2, the cops started hassling me and threatening to arrest me for not having any ID on me. I mean, it's like they just keep you there. It's that vicious circle. So I never flew a sign on the streets until my van got impounded. And then I started flying a sign trying to get my van out of impound, and that didn't work. So in the long run, what happened was when I did get housed, it was a blessing in disguise because they would have never found me if I still had my van. So I look at it as a blessing in disguise. And the police planting drugs on me out there and just everything they did when I got housed, I was supported through getting all my wants and warrants taken care of. It cost me $3,200, but I got my driver's license back. And hey, I just bought a new car, you know? So this is what I'm talking about. Just the support is incredibly important. And when I was met on the streets, I was met not with their agenda, but they met me where I was at because it's my life. And back in the olden days, when you'd have to jump through all those hoops and like I put in the chat, I call it the chutes and ladders effect because you get up so high and then woo, you're back down at the bottom and you got to start all over. So, you know, just there was, I forgot what I was going to say, but back then, you know, the housing, they didn't have housing first. They didn't have harm reduction practices, but all that together, it stabilizes you and it makes you know that the next step is going to be little, but it's going to be huge.
Yeah, so for the audience, a couple of concepts to keep in mind. One is housing first, which we've talked about on several occasions, and then the harm reduction model is very, very important as well. Let's move a little bit, and Dorothy, congratulations on buying the new car. That's a great accomplishment. So let's talk a little bit about myths and misconceptions. Each one of you have touched on a little bit the notion of drug use. And so the correlation between drug use and then the other issue you talked about was mental illness. So the correlation between drug use, mental illness, and being unhoused or living on the street, many people in society feel like there's a cause and effect. So that someone is a drug user and that's what caused them to be out on the street, or someone has mental illness and that's what caused them to be out on the street. I'd like to know what each of your perspectives are on this, because I think this is a myth, or this is a misconception that really permeates our society, and it gives society the ability to have a pass, so to speak. Like, oh, that's their fault, or that's their choice, so that then the rest of us don't have to take any action on it. So Shawn, you want to start us off?
Sure. You know, we have 70,000 people homeless in Los Angeles County right now. A small percentage of those, I think the national statistics show it to be somewhere between, and maybe this isn't considered a small percentage, somewhere between 25 and maybe 30% might experience mental health issues or substance use issues. That's not necessarily hardcore addiction issues. Those are just kind of self-reported issues. Do folks who are homeless use substances and have drug problems? Absolutely. Do folks who are homeless have mental health issues? Absolutely. Do they exist in any greater numbers than those of us who are housed? They don't. It's, you know, it's the same. There's people who are, you know, the greatest number of people who are experiencing untreated drug addiction and mental illness live in homes. They've never been homeless, and most of them are not in danger of becoming homeless. You know, when I talk a lot about drug addiction and mental illness not being a root cause of the issue, but more a symptom of greater kind of structural or systemic failures, I'm talking about this idea that in a country as rich with resources, know-how, and political will as ours, there should never be an instance where a substance use disorder or a mental illness results in someone becoming homeless. The fact of the matter is that we have never had an appropriate or effective drug and alcohol treatment system or mental health system to address these issues kind of upstream at the level where they occur before they end up in homelessness. You know, if we really want to point to who's doing all the drugs, I mean, to be totally honest, you know, it's white middle-class housed Americans who are using all the drugs. That's who's using the most of the substances. But as we talked about earlier, Brian, these are macroeconomic issues. There's a lot of folks who will never have those kinds of consequences based upon those behaviors because they have resources in place that will not allow them to fall into homelessness. And I'll say this, one of my favorite quotes is by a Hungarian physician who works in Canada. His name is Dr. Gabor Mate. And he says this, that, you know, addiction is a response to pain. We need to stop asking why so much addiction and start asking why so much pain. And that really resonates with me. People are not using drugs to the level where they are addicted because it's fun anymore. You know, this is a public health issue, not a criminal issue. This is a really deep response to pain, and we need to treat it as a public health issue, and we need to look at it in that way, and we need to create systems that effectively treat these issues, because it is a crisis. It's a crisis amongst people who are unhoused, and it's a crisis for people who live in homes as well across this nation.
Thank you, Shawn. Lindsay and Dorothy, are there any thoughts that you would like to add as far as the myth that drug use causes homelessness? Lindsay?
You mean that homeless? Oh yeah. Sorry, I just flipped that in my head. So basically what I want to say is that Shawn is amazing, and he said everything that I think needs to be said on the topic. I mean, it really is what Shawn just outlined. We have to change the system. We have to vote and change and make laws and support our legislators in doing the right thing and supporting affordable housing and supporting laws that will end homelessness. It's just that's what we have to do. We have to be active, and there's a lot of ways to do that.
Yeah, and what I like, Lindsay, is all three of you are actively engaged in that advocacy and that social justice battle. Dorothy, what are you thinking about the nexus between drug use and homelessness?
Well, when I became homeless the last time, I was clean for 4 years, almost 4 years at that time. And I was working, and then because of domestic violence, I lost my job because I had black eyes and I couldn't go to work like that. And then when I became homeless, I just went right back into my addiction. And even though I had all those years clean behind me, it didn't matter anymore. I had nothing to fight for. I want to recognize that when you're homeless, I always say this to everybody, when you're homeless, you're living in a fishbowl. Everybody sees every move you make, except if you could really get deep in a bush, if you have to, go to the restroom or something, and you go really deep, then they can't see you. But everything else you do, you're just right out front and center. And Shawn said it very well. What happens behind closed doors, people living in homes, that's not out there. So they don't associate it with, just the whole, everybody has risk of drug issues and mental health issues because we don't see it. And so all they think is that they associate it with homelessness. And that's just so wrong to do that, because it's a lot worse than just people suffering on the streets.
Yeah, and what I've heard.
Can I add one just real quick additional thing? You talked about the harm reduction model, and the harm reduction model for us is one that acknowledges that drug use is a topic and a crisis of our time. We choose not to ignore it or judge it or demonize it. We choose to approach it head on for the reality that it is. Drug addiction, substance use has been around forever. It's not going anywhere. We know this, that for the past 50 years, we've engaged in a war on drugs where we spent over $1 trillion. And at the end of the day, after all of that, we have more drug users, more drugs than ever before. So, a paradigm shift is called for in terms of how we think about drug use and how we approach it and how we treat it. Just this idea that, over half of our prisons are now filled with low-level, nonviolent drug users who should actually be treating or receiving treatment. Right? These are. I think of these things as symptoms, not primary causes. So it's just, we can keep doing what we've been doing. It's obviously not working. It would really behoove us to try to look at this in a different way and perhaps try a different model to address these issues. Again, it just doesn't self-resolve by itself. People do not just stop using substances because they wake up one morning and say, I think I'm going to not do that anymore. It just doesn't happen that way.
Yeah, and I think your quote from Gabor Mate is illuminating, and I hope that sits with everyone. Instead of asking, why are there so many drugs? Why is there so much pain? What is it about our society that causes anguish, frustration, anxiety, sorrow, depression? What is it about our daily lives that creates those conditions? And then the way to look at it too is to compare it to other societies where that doesn't happen to the same extent. How are we living our lives in ways that are unhealthy and damage our psyche? Dorothy, I see you wanted to add a little bit as well.
Yes, I wanted to share, in 1995, I was arrested for possession for sales of methamphetamine. I went to prison for that for 2 years. When I was released from prison, they released me on my little sister's warrants because I had used her name as an alias once. So 9 days I traveled the bus around, and I wasn't even her. All they had to do is look at me, look at my fingerprints, they would know that. So, but when they released me, after 2 years in state prison and then 9 days riding that bus around in the county facilities, then they released me with no money, not a penny. I had nothing. Everything that I had when I was arrested was gone. 2 years is a long time. So, and I remember standing outside of Goodwill and I was contemplating going in and stealing some clothes that fit me, something that fit me, because what I had on did not fit me. And the lady walked out of the store and she goes, and she could see the need in my face and just the struggle I was having. I got to go. First, I asked the manager if she could help me. She said no. So I went outside and I was really frustrated. And then I'm just going to go in and steal something. And then that lady saw that on my face. And I think we should all recognize people's needs like that, because that lady kept me from going back to jail that day, because I probably would have went in there and stole stuff and got caught and went back to jail. But the thing is back then, they really, really criminalized homelessness. And we've been fighting to decriminalize it so much. And really very little's changed. A lot's changed, but not enough. And, it's not somebody's fault that they can't afford to get something to eat and they can't afford to get something clean to wear. We have to recognize that that's a break in our system. We have to have more places that address stuff like that. And, when I got out of prison, I was on parole. I did 4 violations and 4 different prison violations, 4 months, 5 months, 7 months. And it's like they get a hold of you and they just don't let go. So it's crazy and it's just not fair. It's like you're fighting to try to get your life together and somebody keeps kicking you down. It's not okay.
And that's exactly what Lindsay was talking about as far as the revolving door. Thank you for sharing your story, Dorothy. I want to ask one last question about myths, and then we're going to open it up to the audience. So please, audience members, be thinking about a question that we haven't covered yet that might help you to understand this issue a little bit more deeply. And I also, just to frame that for the audience, what we'll do is we'll have you raise your hand. We'll create a queue so that then we can walk through it in an organized fashion. So if you can figure out on the bottom your action buttons, the raised hand button, that would be great. And then I'll work on calling people. So the last question for Dorothy, Lindsay, and Shawn for now is about this another misconception about service resistance and the related sort of concept of, oh yeah, people like being on the street, they like being independent, they don't really want any rules and regulations. What would you say to someone who said, oh, well, we can't solve this issue because folks on the street are service resistant and do not want to comply or do not want to accept what's being offered to them? Who would like to take that first?
I'd like to defer it to Shawn.
Okay, I'll jump in. Yeah, I think service resistance and non-compliance are terms that we created to explain why people could not access many of the broken systems that we were offering them. I worked in homeless services at a time where we perpetuated that narrative out into the community because we were demanding so many hoops that people had to jump through to get help. When they couldn't do that, it couldn't possibly be us that was not, that was wrong. It had to be the individual, and that's a way that we've explained that away. I largely blame the homeless service sector and mental health system for coining those terms and then disseminating that out to the general public. The fact of the matter is, we should have been bending to meet the needs of the individual as service providers, not requiring the individual to bend to jump through the hoops of the system. As far as people wanting to live on the street, I've always said this, in the 18 years that I've done this work, I've yet to meet a single person who didn't want their own apartment, their own house, their own bedroom, their own bathroom or kitchen. I think we've all met people who have said, I like this lifestyle. And then we attribute all homeless folks to, we kind of put them in that bucket. But the fact of the matter is, we never offered homes or rooms to independent living to people throughout homeless services. We always offered them shelters, treatment centers, if you could even get beds in either one of those things. And people became used to that being what we were talking about in homeless services. So if you said to someone, hey, you want to go inside? Basically, you were talking about a very chaotic emergency shelter or a compliance-based treatment center or facility of some type. You were never talking about, hey, do you want your own home? And so people became used to saying, no, I don't want to go in that. I mean, I've stayed in shelters. They're highly chaotic, problematic places. And so I think what people have been saying no to for the longest time are those types of settings. It's only the past 10 years that we've actually been offering homes as a solution to homelessness. But you have to remember, we have 30 years of history before that, where when people talked about, hey, do you want to go inside? Homeless folks knew exactly what we were talking about, and that meant something that was not their own home. So there's a lot of distrust within the system, I think. But the fact of the matter is, nobody wants to live outside. Imagine how hard that is, just to find a toilet, get rid of your trash, carry your belongings, find the place to eat, be rousted by the cops, be stigmatized by society, be hated in general. Like, people are not choosing that lifestyle. I guarantee it.
And let's go to Dorothy for another comment on that. Thank you, Shawn. And Dorothy, could you also describe what permanent supportive housing is? Because I don't want to make any assumptions on the part of the audience. I think many in the audience know what that is, but it's what Shawn is describing as far as providing housing. So what is Teague Terrace and what does it do?
First, I'd like to share about service-resistant folks.
Good, please.
When you're living on the streets and you're homeless and they come at you and they say, oh, we're going to help you get off the streets, but they're going to take me out of my community. And before I became homeless, I worked here in Pasadena for 4 years. I had an apartment. I didn't want to leave my community. I didn't want to leave everything that I knew and go to Skid Row. I'm from Hacienda Heights and Walnut. I don't belong in Skid Row, and nobody belongs in Skid Row, and why, and that's what sometimes they would offer, like a lot of agencies, because that was where all the services were back in these days. The services were like at Midnight Mission, Union Rescue Mission, but they're all missions, and they didn't support at that time permanent supportive housing as we see it today. So permanent supportive housing is where you have extensive case management and a whole team of folks that work with everybody on an individual basis. And it's a support team. It's a rah, rah, rah. We cheer people on and we help them move on to the next step and the next step. So I live in permanent supportive housing, and I had, like I said, extensive case management. I had a lot of trauma from a kidnapping that happened to me back in 2000, where I was I was raped. It was just horrific. I don't even want to talk about it really, but I was so scared of this guy finding me that I felt actually a little bit of safety in homelessness, because I could move if I got any idea he was near me. But once I moved into my house, I had more support than I would ever have on the streets. And to me, that's what helped me heal, not to mention Shawn Morrissey sitting in that psychiatrist's office with me while I just cried my eyes, and trying to heal, trying to get rid of this trauma and this weight that I carried on my shoulders for so long. That's what permanent supportive housing is. It's Housing Works, where Shawn used to work, where I work for now. Our motto is whatever it takes for as long as it takes. So we are like Union Station, 97% housing retention rate. You betcha. That's number one. It doesn't matter if the person messes up. If they have a lease violation, we work with them for the betterment of themselves and the betterment of their health and the betterment of the community that they live in. And then eventually the community that they wind up serving. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, and that's the key point, is that once lives are transformed, then they're able to contribute back to society.
Right.
And that's what I want to point out, is that Lindsay, Dorothy, and Shawn, and Cynthia, who's not here, are contributing back to society in many ways. We lost Shawn because of a technical glitch, but let's go to the questions and something else that a lot of people on the call are planners. And so I want you to be thinking about, and when we get to Juliana, I'd like her to go into that a little bit more depth, but I want you to be thinking about what is the role of planning in our cities, whether it's zoning or whether it's development. What is the role of planners to address the homelessness issue? So we'll go with DMC D3, which sounds like an 80s rock band first. And then we'll go to Joseph, Juliana, and then Jill. So
Hi, I'm David McDonald, and a lot of questions come to mind, but I'll try to make it concise. But how do we create more of these corporation for supportive housing? Do they get public funding? How do we direct some of that toward them? Because they seem to be more successful than the $500,000 a unit it's going to cost to build these units that we voted for in the two propositions a few years ago. Those don't seem to be coming fast enough. What does the panel think about what is the best solution to direct those funds to provide more permanent supportive housing in the shortest time? And what model would work the best?
Could I
great, thank
answer
you.
that?
Dorothy, please.
Yeah, it's because I'm all about CSH. So yeah, I'm not only on the National Board of Directors, I'm also on the Audit Committee. And so, our funding is so strong. Even through the pandemic, we've had to close down a lot of our offices, but we're all working from home anyway. But our funding source is so strong. Our donors are the Conrad and Hilton Foundation, Bill and Melinda Gates, before their divorce. I don't know how they're wording it now. All the housing authorities, all the United Ways across the country, all the churches across the country. We have huge funding sources. And so we are able to get the pre-development loan to the people who want to develop properties, supportive housing, permanent supportive housing properties. We're able to allocate that funding on a very low scale interest rate for them, with like a 30-year. It's phenomenal. And in return, we support back to like the CSH Speak Up advocates, which Lindsay and I are both CSH Speak Up advocates. That's my second thing after the Pasadena COC that I did. And so that gives us a seat where we sit and we speak on local, state, and federal levels. And I go to Washington, D.C. I talk to the Biden-Harris administration team on homelessness. I talked to Robert Marbut when Trump was the president. And so we keep up there at top, and down here on the street where we are, we keep together. We keep it all tied together so that they see what it's all about, because they don't know what homelessness is about. They don't have any idea, Yeah. So
David, thank you very much for your question, and it's important. So hopefully Dorothy's response gave you a starting point. Yes.
Yes, it did.
Great, thank you. Joseph, let's move to you. And go ahead and unmute. Oh, Lindsay, did you have something you wanted to add before
Question
Joseph?
in the chat. There's
Let's,
been a question in the chat for a while, so I just wanted to put that out there.
okay, let's work through the live questions first, and then we'll get to the questions in the chat.
Am I on?
You're on now,
Yeah,
Joseph.
okay.
Thank you.
Two comments, please. One is in support of something that Dorothy said a couple of minutes ago. 2 years ago, where I teach, we worked on a homeless issue in the city of Glendora. And at the time, they had about 110 or so known homeless folks in the city. And they were a very, very large percentage of them, more than half, maybe 3/4, I don't remember exactly what, were really known to the city administration and the librarian and so forth, because they had lived in Glendora. They had been born and raised there. And the last thing that and they were living in their cars because they had fallen on very, very hard times or living some other way. And the last thing they wanted to do was to leave their community. They're in support of what Dorothy was saying a couple of minutes ago. Their sense of place was all they had left. And so I support what you were saying. The other thing, real quickly, is that spiritually a lot of work needs to be done with the haves, or as rather than the have-nots. I have a friend who lives 2 doors away from the Kardashians in Hidden Hills, and also has a beach house in an area where the few vacant lots that there are go for $3 million each. I won't go on about what she has, but we were walking somewhere one day, and sometimes you meet a person who is really hungry. And I'm not patting myself in the back at all, but I connected and I saw this old man really was hungry. And I reached in my pocket, and what I had was a $5 bill. I gave it to him. He needed it much more than I did at that point. And she just looked at me like shocked and said, "What did you do that for?" It was like a $5 bill in her bag was like my having a nickel in my pocket. But yet she was surprised and offended that I did this. We need to work spiritually a lot on these people.
Joseph, I think your comments are really helpful when we're thinking about building solutions. And that first one about the spiritual nature of all of us, thinking more as brothers and sisters to people who have found themselves in unhoused conditions. And then the other one about place being so important. So Joseph, thank you very much for those comments.
Thank you.
Let's move on to Juliana. And
Okay, thank you, Brian, and thank you all to our wonderful panelists and everybody who came today. As a planner, we talk about homelessness like we do about poverty, that it's actually a wicked problem, that it's not, it's a symptom of so many other systemic problems in this country in particular. And I think Shawn touched on this, and also this idea of pain. What is it that we produce so much pain in people that they are so despondent and they lose themselves? But having said that, if we think of homelessness as a symptom of the systemic problem, then the solutions have to be more directed towards some kind of holistic thinking. And we have such siloed thinking. And I'm saying this after, being a university professor for, well over 2+ decades. In California alone, the state, I was thinking about this, that the state of California is the largest property owner in California. The system of higher education, the universities, the CSUs, the University of California, the CSU, the community college system has an enormous amount of surplus land that is sitting there idle. We have paid for this. We own this. It's we the people. This is our property. Why can't we start thinking about how much money gets channeled into incarceration rather than into like creating more housing and creating more opportunities for people? And it's like the law enforcement folks don't talk to the higher education folks, and nobody is talking to each other. And I think until we start having those system-wide kinds of conversations, this is just going to spiral out of control, and it only makes us more pain. It only creates more pain at the end. So let's figure out a way. I was going to talk to Chris Holden about this, about the fact that there's so much property here that's sitting fallow in these big campuses where you could easily house people, and students are homeless too. I've had so many students that are homeless that are supporting their families that are just 1 inch away of being in big trouble and not being able to finish their education, which will help them get out of their situation. So
Those
maybe, can we get a posse together? Shawn, will you go with me and talk to Chris Holden, and let's go talk to somebody in law enforcement or who's the advocate for decriminalizing certain things? It's going to have to be that kind of discussion if we're really going to make inroads, because there are too many people fighting for a little piece of the pie when they're all part of the pie, So I don't know, that's sort of my take on it on a Saturday morning, but it's a wicked problem because there's something fundamentally wrong here. I lived in France. You didn't see homeless people because they have socialized medicine, because they have, I lived in public housing. I was in China. In China, you don't see homeless people because they don't have any of those. Of course, everybody gives up their property rights. There is no private property, but everyone's got a job. Everyone is fed. Everyone has a place to live. But we're afraid of any kind of socialization in this country, being socialist. And also, I just wanted to say, Brian, it's not just an American phenomenon. I was just at a program in Britain where they're talking about homelessness as well. And they do have socialized medicine, but they don't have the other piece. They don't have enough public housing. So you have to do all of it at the same time. And I think if we just come up with a number, how much it costs to keep someone incarcerated, how many units could we build with that kind of funding, or the university keeping people in school that really, maybe shouldn't be in the university, should get, technical training or something more consolidated. But we have these giant bureaucracies with an awful lot of waste. So my soapbox, and thank you for raising these questions.
Thank you, Juliana. I think you've touched on quite a few solutions. So Dorothy, do you have a comment from the panel?
Yes, in regards to the Ramada Inn that you were speaking of and the Salvation Army that they're building right now, I went to those town hall meetings myself, and with the, we have to change the people, the not in my backyarders. We got to change their hearts, because I myself would rather see somebody come up than keep them down. So when you're yelling at the city council member because this building is going to be 4 stories high and it's going to block your view of the mountains, in my eyes, that's kind of selfish. That's very selfish. And also the Ramada Inn, it was horrible what happened there that night. With that, we had to leave. Bill Huang, all of us, we just left. We couldn't even talk. They wouldn't even let us talk. So what happened? COVID hit. Project Room Key came to be. They rented out every room in the Ramada Inn. to Project Room Key. And guess what? Guess who owns the Ramada Inn now? It's permanent supportive housing, as it should have been in the first place. But it's a sad that it had to be that traumatic event that let it go through. And even afterwards, people were calling me. I don't know why. They go, well, you're an advocate. I go, yeah, but I'm for it. And she's like, but I don't like him coming down the alley. I don't like him near my house. And I said, so would you rather have him out on the street, living out in front of your house and using your bushes as a restroom? I mean, you know, give these people somewhere to go. You know, they deserve it just as much as you do. And oh, well, I pay taxes. Well, they did too. I'm sure they worked and paid taxes too, you know.
Thank you, Dorothy, and thanks for that update on the Ramada Inn. Just a quick word for all of the people who have their hand up. We want to try to get to all of you. So if you could be fairly, because we've only got about 15, 16 minutes left that we've allocated. If you could be fairly precise in the question or the comment that you'd like to ask, that would be great, so that we can hear from Jill, Charles, Pete, Larry, Marcia, and Anthony. So Jill, you're next.
Oh, this is amazing. You've done an excellent job, and I just so appreciate everyone and their speaking. I have a couple quick questions. A couple years ago, I heard someone from the police department speak at our clergy community coalition, saying that 1,800 people that year had been arrested who were on the street. And my heart broke, because I knew that there was just, you know, a little over 500 folks that were experiencing homelessness in our city. And I approached him and I said, I don't understand how you could arrest people 1,800. And he says, oh yeah, we arrested them multiple times, over and over. And I just thought, my goodness, you know, we were at a meeting, me and Anthony, on the other side of Pasadena, West Pasadena, and the police were basically saying they're all service resistant. And so I just wonder if this fabulous program today could somehow be part of a training for the police department and helping them begin to have some compassion and understanding rather than judging and arresting.
Great question, Jill. Let's dive into that real quick.
And then I have one other quick question.
Yeah, we can come back to that. Shawn, do you want to take that?
Yeah, we've been talking to the Pasadena Police Department and creating relationships with them. And that is definitely part of our intention for 2022, is to kind of shore up those relationships and try to partner with them in those ways.
Lindsay?
Isn't Cynthia on a committee that oversees the police? Shawn, don't you know about this?
Yeah, we have the new Police Oversight Commission.
Yeah, so we have somebody who's in LEAP, which is the Lived Expertise Advisory Panel that I'm on as policy chair for Union Station. We have somebody who's actually on the oversight committee who is, you know, who may be able to do a little bit of work with them.
Great. So Jill, Shawn and Lindsay will take action on that. Thank you for raising it. What's your other question?
So this has to do with zoning. So both the concept of temporary housing, tiny shelters, as opposed to more of a permanent approach, but planning to make it possible that we do have enough housing units in Pasadena. In our housing element policy for the next 8 years, we're supposed to have 9,429 units, with a little over 6,000 of those affordable. And yet it says, even though they want to adopt capacity and all the specific plans to be able to accomplish this, they're not increasing any of the development caps. They're keeping them all the same, and there's no zone change whatsoever. And so I don't understand. I feel like there's a real disconnect. I feel like those are just words saying they're going to somehow do something. There's no dates or deadlines saying that's going to happen, and no policy suggestion that they try to increase the caps. And so I'm just very disheartened by what I read, and I'd like some response on that.
Great, that's another terrific question. Really, really helpful. Shawn, Lindsay, Dorothy, do any of you have any perspective on zoning?
I don't, and Jill, you probably know way more about this than I do, but my sense is that based upon like the history of housing elements where nothing has happened and that's always been allowed, and that may or may not be the case moving forward, that I don't know if cities are just taking their chances and seeing how it shakes out at the end of it all, and maybe that's why we're not seeing that kind of real commitment to creating exactly what you're talking about.
And Jill, can we?
Actually, if I can just butt in here, I'm actually on the housing task force. I'm a planning commissioner for Pasadena, and I'm
Great.
a mayor's appointee. Even though those numbers are in the housing element, cities themselves are not in the business, unfortunately, in this country of building housing. And we have all of that. When the community redevelopment funding went away, it makes it very hard to build public housing. And we've advocated for having a housing authority in Pasadena to actually build housing. So that's still on the table. But cities don't build housing. You have to encourage developers to come and build housing. And it's private property. People don't necessarily have to sell their property or convert their property or make it become more housing. What that housing element does just says that there's enough zoning to allow for it. That's what it is. I know we want it to be more. I want it to be more. So that's where we have to advocate for something different.
So I think as an action step, Jill and Juliana, if afterward you guys could connect and talk about how in Juliana's role she can support the proposal that you put forward, Jill. So let's try to get to a few more questions. But Jill, great, really, really important topics. Thank you for raising them. Charles.
Hi, thank you for the presentation. I just really wanted to jump in really quick on that zoning question. I work as a planner for the city of Anaheim. And as part of the housing element update that we're going through and recertification, HD has called out, we need to include in our zoning the ability to develop certain types of properties. For example, multi-use service centers, supportive housing programs, supportive housing facilities. And so these particular types of uses, I think, are being looked at in more detail, and that we are now required to add different types of uses into our zoning code and allow them to be located in more areas. And so I think that's kind of a good step in the right direction. So that's kind of I think, hopefully, if you have any questions, Jill, feel free to reach out to me. Thank you again, Lindsay, and Shawn, for sharing your compelling stories, your experiences, and Brian for moderating. My question is on services, and we've heard a lot about services and its importance for successful healing, bringing people as a successful community member, neighbor. My question is focused on the provision of services, particularly on whether anyone in the panel sees a difference in providing services within a supportive housing project compared to providing services from a multi-service center. For example, there's a new, relatively new multi-service center in Orange County called Be Well OC. It's a one-stop shop where an individual family can go in, be provided services. There's a shelter there, as well as some supportive housing units there. And so my initial understanding is that the supportive housing project in a multi-service center provides services, but slightly differently. And so I was wondering if anyone had any comments on the main differences in how we provide those services between the two types of facilities, a supportive housing project versus a multi-use service center, and if there's any lessons learned that we can add into our zoning code to better support more development for either of those types of facilities.
Yeah, Dorothy, it looks like you're ready to respond. Charles, in the meantime, could you drop your work email in the chat so that Jill and Juliana could contact you? Dorothy, what do you think about the difference in those service provision models?
I wanted real quick to say something about the zoning issue. We don't have to address zoning issues. I know that when Fuller closed their campus for a while, that whole, all those apartment buildings were sitting there empty. And I remember driving away from the homeless memorial one night and seeing that, and it just broke my heart. And there's no zoning provisions there. If the city could take over properties like that, it's already built. All they got to do is upgrade them. That's just an idea. But the one-stop shop is cool. Every city should have one. But what really counts is permanent supportive housing. People, when they get into their own housing, that's, if you're in a temporary shelter or, you're like interim housing, it's not the same as knowing that you're going to be there in 5 or 10 years. Because when you know you're going to be there, you really want to change and you feel secure making that change.
Great. Shawn, do you have some thoughts too?
Yeah, really quick. I mean, it's such a huge question. I did send you my phone number, Charles, so maybe we could touch base this week coming up or something. But, there's been an acknowledgement that the way we did service provision for a long time had to change because it only targeted the folks who could, jump through all of the hoops. And so that those models and those ways of being, whether it's a multi-service access center or permanent housing or rapid rehousing, I think there's a model that kind of ties into all of those. And I'll say this, that they turn out to be, I don't want to say less clinical or therapeutic, but because they include all of those elements, but much more relational and human in terms of the way that we approach people, and that in and of itself creates a whole momentum of forward movement that the old models didn't create, and that way of being should be present in any homeless service provision that we're doing. All that to say, there's a huge lack of uniformity and agreement in terms of how that plays out across the county and the country and the different providers. But maybe we could talk further.
Thanks, Charles, for your question. And Shawn, thank you for the great response. I want to ask everyone on the call, this is the moderator's prerogative. We are very close to 12 noon. Do you have any problems? Would you be willing to stay 10 more minutes so that we can finish all the questions? Some people I'm sure have to leave at noon, but do we have, actually, this is for Dorothy, Shawn, and Lindsay as much as anyone. Can you stay for about 10 extra minutes? Dorothy says yes. Lindsay?
I can stay for 10 minutes.
Okay, Shawn?
Yes, but I charge time and a half.
Okay, actually, I will contribute double time to all three of you.
10 years.
Yes. And just to build on what Dorothy said, especially for people who are working in city government, with COVID-19, there are many office spaces that are not being used as much anymore. People are working from home. So not only the contemplation of the apartments at Fuller to be converted to permanent supportive housing, but how would it look to convert office space into housing, whether it's affordable housing or permanent supportive housing? So I just want to throw that out there for whether you're a commissioner, you're a planner, you're an advocate, how might you be able to push that idea forward? All right, Pete, you're up next, and then we'll go to Larry, Marcia, and Anthony.
Recognition, and then seconding Dorothy's motion, recognition to Shawn, Lindsay, and Dorothy. First of all, I want to honor your sobriety. I get it. And I also value your honesty, authenticity, and impact. Huge, huge. Keep up the good work. I second Dorothy's motion. As I was listening to her talk about permanent supportive housing, PSH, permanent supportive housing, I suspect that a large percentage of the population, the homeless population that we're talking about, would benefit from permanent supportive housing. Although there would be a variety of solution categories depending on individual circumstances, stuff that I've experienced, and then this is what's been emphasized here as well. Dorothy, whatever it takes, as long as it takes, right?
Yep.
And no need to reinvent the wheel, folks. No need to reinvent the wheel. clearly, based on the folks in this chat room alone, there are current models that work. There are current models that work. So let's not reinvent wheels here, folks. There are current models that work, and it sounds like permanent supportive housing is critical, absolutely critical. I had the opportunity to be out at San Diego YMCA Community Support Services Escondido model for a category, at one of the categories, foster care. They leave foster care. Where do they go? Very few support systems, right? So the San Diego YMCA purchased a 24-unit facility. Within that facility, one of the units is permanent supportive care. One of the apartments is where the permanent supportive care is happening for those that are transitional between foster care and adult. But the models are out there. Thank you. Thank you all.
Excellent. Thank you, Pete. Larry, are you ready?
I am ready. I'm on my phone. Oh, I'm sorry. That's not going to go over well.
If you could mute your computer and then stay on your phone, it might still work. Do you want us to circle back to you as you sort that out? I think you muted your phone too. All right, how about this? We'll keep your hand up. We'll come back to you, try to work on it, okay, Larry? Or you can put it in the chat as well. Marcia.
Thank you for the opportunity. I want to focus a little bit on a little bit different. I see many homeless women on the street. For the most part, the ones I see are men. I know there are homeless women out there. Prompts this question: are we painting too broad a brush with respect to the causes and experience of women versus men? If so, would the effect of the types of service responses change? Would they be the same? Are there no differences, etc.?
So Lindsay and Dorothy, Shawn, anybody? So is there a different response? I think what you're asking, Marcia, between if it's a man or a woman who has been homeless, is that correct?
You're muted, Marcia.
And I hate it when people do that, but I read and I know through people I've talked with is that many women are on the street because of domestic violence. And my guess is that's not made a primary cause for men to be on the street. That prompted the question about different causes. Are there different causes? Would there be a different response because of that? I don't hear much about that. I have to go to the internet and research it, but is that true? I mean, it's just a question. I'd be interested in responses.
Great, thank you.
It is.
So Dorothy will start and then we'll go to Shawn.
So when it comes to domestic violence and women being on the streets, in my case, I was by myself. I was, I would not let my abuser near me because every time he was near me, he blew my spot and the police were involved. And I was just done with all that. But a lot of women who are homeless will tend to lean on another homeless gentleman for security, for support. And it sort of is hard because what happens is they wind up falling in love with each other. And then one person gets housed, but they're not married. So the other person's left out on the streets. It's really, it's crazy. My boyfriend of 27, 28 years, he lives next door to me and he was homeless on the other side of town when I was homeless over here. He was not my abuser, but because we aren't married, but it works out good. He lives next door to me and go home, and I have my privacy and, we share a dog. We go grocery shopping together. It works out really good. But a lot of people don't have that great advantage. And it's important that we recognize the need for somebody to not be alone. And I think that when somebody gets a housing voucher, that it should be easier for another person to get on that lease. And it would certainly double up the quickness of getting people off the streets, as long as they are abiding by all the, the rules of the lease, and there's no problems. That's just my opinion. I think that it should be open to people to move in together.
Great, thank you, Dorothy. Shawn.
Yeah, thanks, Marcia. Good to see you. It is true. And I think that historically, women have been left out of the solutions, as they have, going back hundreds of years, not just related to homelessness. But there's been an acknowledgement that domestic violence can absolutely be a cause of homelessness or a housing risk, and that a lot of funding more recently has gone into bolstering resources and services that identify and focus on that specifically, especially with our coordinated entry system that was created a few years ago, and also the introduction of what we call trauma-informed care that's infused through all of our services and models that look to acknowledge that dynamic moving through the solution into housing. Of course, there's still are not enough resources that we need for anybody. And this is a system that we really need to build up, and have been hopefully doing so, but again, still not there yet on a lot of levels.
Thank you. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Shawn. Larry, did you sort out, I didn't see anything in the chat for you. Did you sort out your, okay. Okay. Let's go to Anthony.
Well, first I want to thank you, Brian and Juliana and Dorothy and Shawn, for all the amazing work you do. I think the word advocacy has come up a lot. And what I found as a affordable housing and homeless housing advocate is that affordable housing and supportive housing does not get built without advocacy. One of the things we did was have a 9-month campaign to get 69 units of supportive senior housing at Heritage Square South. And it took another months and months of advocacy to get other policies and projects approved. And recently, the Ramada Inn was going to be affordable housing developer was wanting to turn it into supportive housing, but they couldn't get support from the city. So it just takes a lot of work, but it's good work. It's what Dr. King called the long and bitter but beautiful struggle for justice. And I want to invite you to be part of that struggle. We've had a lot of successes in our city. We've reduced the homeless count by over 50%. And it's because Union Station and churches and advocates and everybody has been working together in Pasadena, and we're making a difference. So I'm just saying, advocacy is what really makes the difference. And I hope I've put my email in the chat, anthony@makinghousinghappen.org, and I hope you can contact me, because I'm eager to work with anybody who wants to advocate for affordable and supportive housing.
Great, and I would highly encourage everyone to read through the chat. There's some great, and I apologize to those who have commented in the chat that we weren't able to raise them up today, but please read through before you leave. Maybe Juliana or Brian Marchetti could save the chat. It might be useful for future reference. Jill, I see you have your hand still up. Did you have another question?
Yes, it was in relationship to, we have about 50 churches throughout Southern California we're working with that are interested in having affordable housing on their, but the zoning isn't working for a majority of those. And it's a great opportunity. And so and churches want to have this, they're excited about the opportunity of stewardship, of better using the land that they have. But the whole issue really comes down to zoning. The funding is actually there, but they can't access until they get at least 40 to 50 units on that site, and then tax credits can be accessed and hopefully won for that site. But it's something that I'd love to hear, thoughts on that, and what our, panelists feel about that model, and if they think it would work in our city and other cities.
Yeah, Shawn, Dorothy, Lindsay, what do you think about church property as housing? Go ahead, Shawn.
Oh, sorry. I thought I missed half the question. I was trying to respond to something, but I think I heard your question. And yeah, absolutely. I think that's crucial if we can get that done. I know Jill and Anthony have been working deeply on that kind of stuff, and we do have one project that I think some folks from Pasadena know about that we're doing over at All Saints, which is just temporary kind of safe haven respite shelter. But and I know there's a lot of churches that want to step up and do that kind of thing.
Yeah, and this actually ties into Larry's question. So Larry, thank you for dropping it in the chat. And Pete, I'm sorry, we're right at 10 minutes, so I'm not going to try to get to your last question. So just to sort of wrap up, and Shawn, Dorothy, and Lindsay, I'd like you to each just give, and this is based on Larry's question, what are some next steps? What can each of us do? Just one thing. We need to close the meeting, so just one thing real quick. What do you think we should be doing? And Larry, thanks for the question. Dorothy, you want to go first?
Sure. I think that a call to action to get with your city council members and see about some policy change.
Great, Lindsay. And go ahead and unmute.
No, I know I'm trying.
Okay.
I just wanted to say, be an advocate. I mean, if you think advocacy is a good thing, and if you think advocacy works, be an advocate. Call your legislators, do what Dorothy just said, talk to people, volunteer your time. It's easy.
Great. Shawn?
I'll just add, just try to do everything that you can to see the human being in the experience. And I think the more that we're able to acknowledge that what's happening right now isn't about that the people experiencing the problems aren't the ones who created it, that there's bigger stuff happening here.
Thank you, Shawn, Dorothy, Lindsay, for participating today. Thank you, Juliana, and the rest of the Southern California Planning Congress for allowing us to have this opportunity. Thank you to Cynthia and Abstentia. And please share what you learned today, my suggestion, with friends and neighbors. Build a coalition, build awareness, use everything that you copy and paste. This is open source. Tell people what you heard. Thank you, Juliana. For the opportunity.
Thank you very much. Let's give all of our panelists and Brian a big round of applause for being here. Thank you so much. I hope we can continue the conversation. We did record this session, so we will try to get it posted on the Southern California Planning Congress website. In the meantime, stay safe and well and committed. And thank you all for being here.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye, thank you.
Thank you, Julie.
Thank you all.
Bye, Anthony and Jill, Shawn.
Bye, Brian, Mark, Chad.
Bye. Love you, Dorothy.
Love you guys so much. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Dorothy. Thank you, Lindsay. Thank you, Brian. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Shawn.
Yeah.
I'm going to call you.
All right. I'll be waiting.
Okay.
Bye, everybody. Have a great weekend.
Okay.
Bye.
Take care,
Bye.
Shawn. You did a great job, Shawn.
Thank you.
Really great.
I appreciate that.
Wonderful.
Thanks so much.
Thanks, Brian. Both Brians. Thank you, Jill. Thank you, Anthony.
And thank you, Juliana, for organizing this, helping to organize this. You and Brian. And those pictures, Brian, are fabulous. Thank you so much for doing
Beautiful,
that.
huh? Yes. Very beautiful.
Yeah.
All right. Bye, everybody.